Somewhere right now, someone is scrolling through their phone at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, carrying a weight they haven't told anyone about. And somewhere right now, a short clip, barely 3 minutes long, is quietly making its way across the internet. No flashy editing, no dramatic music, just a priest sitting in front of a camera saying something so simple that it stops people mid-scroll. Within 24 hours, that clip had been shared thousands of times. Comments sections filled with people saying the same thing over and over. I needed to hear this today. I was about to give up. How did this find me at exactly the right moment? That's the strange thing about a message rooted in divine mercy. It doesn't need special effects. It doesn't need a celebrity face. It just needs to be true. And true things have a way of cutting through the noise of a world that is exhausted, anxious, and quietly starving for hope. The teaching that spread overnight wasn't new. In fact, it echoes something spoken from heaven decades ago, recorded in a small, worn diary by a Polish nun named Senior Faustina. But somehow, when explained clearly in plain language for a generation drowning in guilt, comparison, and despair, it hit differently. This is the story of that message, why it spread, who it reached, and why, if you're watching this right now, there's a good chance it wasn't an accident that you found it either. Because here's the part almost nobody expects. The message isn't really about a viral video at all. It's about you and a door that has been standing open a lot longer than you think. Let's walk through exactly what it said. It started, as these things often do, without any fanfare. A short video was uploaded, no elaborate production, no thumbnail designed by a marketing team, nothing engineered to go viral. It was simply a recording of a talk on divine mercy, the kind of teaching that has been shared in parish halls and retreat centers for years. But something about the timing, the wording, and the way it was framed caused it to spread in a way nobody predicted. Within hours, the comments began stacking up. Not the usual scattered reactions you see on religious content, but something more raw. People weren't just saying, nice video, or God bless. They were confessing things. One person wrote that they had been planning to walk away from their faith entirely, and this was the last thing they watched before deciding to stay. Another wrote that they hadn't set foot in a church in over a decade because of shame over something they had done years ago, something they were certain could never be forgiven. A third simply wrote, I don't believe in coincidences anymore. To understand why a short teaching video could cause this kind of reaction, you have to understand what it was actually about. It wasn't a message about rules. It wasn't a message about being good enough, praying hard enough, or performing your way into God's good graces. It was the opposite. It was a message about a mercy so vast that it doesn't wait for you to clean yourself up first. This idea traces back to a series of private revelations recorded by a young nun in Poland in the 1930s. She described encounters in which she was told, in essence, that mercy is not a reward for the righteous. It is a rescue for the desperate. The greater someone's brokenness, the greater their claim on that mercy, not the smaller. This was a radical reversal of how many people, even lifelong believers, had quietly come to think about God as a scorekeeper, a distant judge tallying wins and losses, waiting to see if you'd earned his attention. The video reframed that entire picture. It described God not as someone standing at a distance with arms crossed, but as someone who runs, the way a parent runs toward a child who has fallen and scraped their knee, not stopping to ask what the child did to deserve help first. That single image, repeated in different forms throughout the clip, is what seemed to break through people's defenses. Why did it resonate so strongly now? Context matters. We are living through what many describe as a mental health crisis, unlike anything in recent memory. Rates of anxiety and depression among young adults have climbed sharply over the past decade. Loneliness is being studied by public health officials the way epidemics once were. People are more connected online than any generation in history, and yet somehow more isolated than ever before. Into that exact environment dropped a message that essentially said, you are not disqualified. You are not too far gone. You are not the exception to mercy. You are exactly who mercy exists for. There's a particular phrase used in the video that seemed to lodge itself in people's minds and refuse to leave. The idea that no matter how many times someone falls, no matter how long they've been away, no matter what specific thing they think makes them unforgivable, the response from heaven is not rejection, but relief. Relief that they finally turned around. Not where have you been, but welcome back. Several viewers later commented that they had grown up in households or attended churches where the emphasis had always landed heavily on sin, punishment, and fear. They knew intellectually that God was supposed to be loving, but emotionally, they carried around a picture of him as someone perpetually disappointed in them. The video didn't ask them to abandon the seriousness of sin. It took sin seriously. In fact, more seriously than a shrug, but it separated the seriousness of the wound from the willingness of the healer. A doctor who takes an illness seriously doesn't refuse to treat the patient. If anything, the more serious the illness, the more urgently the doctor moves. That reframing changed the emotional temperature of the entire message. Instead of guilt driving people further away, it became the very thing drawing them back. Shame, by its nature, tells you to hide. This teaching told people the opposite: hide nothing, because the thing you're most ashamed of is precisely the thing mercy is most eager to reach. By the next morning, the video had been shared across dozens of pages, translated informally into other languages by viewers typing out their own captions, and stitched into shorter clips that spread even further. What had been a routine recording of a routine talk had become, almost overnight, something people were calling a lifeline, long before any video, any hashtag, any comment section full of strangers admitting their secrets to each other. There was a notebook, unremarkable in appearance, filled with the handwriting of a young woman with only a few years of formal education, written in installments over nearly 6 years. She wrote in obedience to a spiritual director who wanted a record kept, not because anyone expected the world to read it one day, but because he sensed something important was happening and didn't want it lost. The young woman was a religious sister living a hidden, largely unremarkable life, cooking, gardening, tending to the daily tasks of convent life. By any outward measure, she was nobody of consequence. That in itself became part of the message's power decades later. God did not choose a theologian, a bishop, or a scholar to carry this particular message to the world. He chose someone easily overlooked, someone whose qualifications by human standards were essentially none. What she recorded over those years was a series of encounters she believed were with Christ himself. Conversations, visions, instructions. At the center of nearly all of them was a single repeated theme: mercy. Not mercy as an abstract theological concept, but mercy as an urgent, personal, almost desperate offer being made to a world that had, in her telling, largely stopped believing it was possible. One image described in her writings became particularly iconic: rays of light streaming outward, one pale and one red, symbolizing water and blood, understood traditionally as symbols of cleansing and life. Beneath the image, a simple phrase: Jesus, I trust in you. 5 words. No complicated theology required to understand them. Just an act of trust offered by anyone in any condition at any moment. For years after her death, her writings were treated with caution by church authorities, partly due to translation issues that made some passages sound doctrinally confused, and partly due to the broader caution the church exercises around private revelation. It wasn't until decades later, after careful re-examination, that the original Polish texts were properly translated and the message was formally recognized and embraced at the highest levels of the church. A feast day was established, a devotion spread. What had once been dismissed as the imaginings of an obscure nun became one of the most widely practiced devotions in the modern church. This history matters because it explains something about why the viral video hit as hard as it did. The message wasn't invented by a content creator trying to find an angle. It wasn't a modern reinterpretation designed for social media. It was, in essence, an old message rediscovered, dusted off, translated into contemporary language, and handed to a generation that happened to be more starved for it than any before. There's something almost poetic in the fact that a message about being overlooked and unworthy came through someone who was, by the standards of her time, overlooked and considered unworthy of much attention. And there's something equally poetic in the fact that it resurfaced centuries later through the most overlooked and dismissed corner of modern life, a short, low-production video that nobody expected to matter either. Several viewers who commented on the video mentioned they had heard the phrase divine mercy before, but had never actually understood what it meant beyond a vague sense of God forgives. What the video did, drawing on this deeper history, was make clear that this wasn't a soft, watered-down version of forgiveness. It was something closer to rescue. The diary describes encounters in which the depth of human sinfulness is not minimized. If anything, it's described in stark, uncomfortable terms, but the response to that sinfulness is not backing away. It's leaning in. One detail from the historical record stood out to many who researched further after watching the clip. The sister reportedly described being told that the greatest sinners have the greatest right to trust in mercy, precisely because they need it most. Not the moderately flawed, not the mostly good with a few slip-ups, the ones who think they've wandered too far to ever come back. Those specifically were described as having priority. For anyone who has spent years quietly convinced they're the exception, the one person whose specific failures put them outside the reach of forgiveness, that detail lands like a direct hit. It's not a general reassurance. It's a specific dismantling of the exact lie that keeps so many people locked in shame and silence. This is likely why the viral clip spread the way it did among people who wouldn't normally engage with religious content at all. It wasn't preaching at them. It was answering a question they'd never said out loud. Is there a version of me too broken to be loved? And the answer, drawn from decades-old writings that had somehow waited patiently for the right moment to resurface, was an unambiguous no. But knowing the history is only part of the picture. The video didn't just repeat old information, it applied it. It took this centuries-old message and pointed it directly at very modern wounds. Comparison culture, chronic anxiety, the exhausting pressure of needing to appear fine online while falling apart privately. That application is where the next part of the story picks up. To understand why this particular message landed so hard with a younger audience, you have to understand the emotional terrain that audience is standing on. This is a generation that has grown up curating a version of themselves for public consumption, carefully selected photos, filtered moments, achievements broadcast while struggles are hidden behind closed doors. The result is a strange, quiet epidemic of feeling like everyone else has it together except you. That constant low-grade comparison creates a very specific kind of shame. Not necessarily shame over one dramatic failure, but a diffuse, exhausting sense of not measuring up, not attractive enough, not successful enough, not disciplined enough, not spiritually good enough. It's a shame without a clear edge, which makes it hard to address directly. You can't repent of not being enough. You can only carry it. The viral message spoke directly into that gap, though not in the way most people expected. It didn't offer self-esteem talking points or generic affirmations. It offered something sturdier, the claim that your worth was never actually up for debate in the first